We live in a time when our idea of community is frayed, strained due to our busy lives, challenged by the political landscape and competing responsibilities. Some of us believe that getting involved will not change anything, that being civically involved will just lead us to defeat and frustration. But what does it mean to feel empowered enough to take action on an issue of concern, to get involved in a cause bigger than ourselves? Fortunately, however, there are many people in our community who are doing something about the conditions in which we live. They are creative and dynamic individuals who are fighting for what is right and for better lives for everyone. This program will show you that one person can make a difference and that the power of one is within all of us. Welcome to the Power of One. Today, my guest is former Deputy Police Chief. I was going to give you already a promotion. Deputy Police Chief Darryl Qualls, and I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for being here today. And a couple of things. One is you were born and raised here in Pasadena. You grew up here.
Yes.
You were Deputy Police Chief, and you also are a board member for Day One, and then also a board member for Noble.
Yes, indeed.
So can you talk a little bit about what it was that led you to become a police officer and why that was so important to you?
Yeah, I as you said, again, thank you for allowing me to be here. But growing up in Pasadena, I attended Pasadena Unified School District, and while I was at John Muir High School, they had a wonderful program at the time that was called Student Government and Law Enforcement, and there was a police officer who was one of the teachers there, and so I signed up for his class, took the class, and I just kind of fell in love with law enforcement. He talked to me about the Pasadena Police Department's Explorer Post, and so at 15, I joined the Pasadena Police Explorers. Remained a police explorer until I was 18, and then at 18, I applied for police cadet and became a police cadet with the police department. And then at 21, I said, well, I've been here all these years, I might as well apply for police officer, and I applied and got the job.
That's amazing that, you knew so young that that's what you wanted to do. I think a lot of people are confused or they don't. Was there anything else that you wanted to be, or did you know like immediately after you heard that particular representative talk, or was there something else that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I was in love with big trucks as a young kid. And my dad was a truck driver, and he worked for a trucking company that was for years here in Pasadena, so I always thought I'd be a truck driver. And then also at PUSD, Pasadena Unified School District, we had a program that actually taught you how to be in television production. So they had cameras, they had a control board.
So you should be here and I should be there.
We should be in different places, or I should be behind the camera, actually.
Right. Yeah. So it seems like it was a pretty rewarding career for you, and over the years, you worked in all sorts of different assignments. What was one of those assignments that you felt like was maybe not necessarily your favorite, or one that really stood out to you?
Well, I had a couple really great assignments that I think really will last with me over the years. And one of them was community relations, because I was born and raised here. I got a chance to actually spend time in the community doing good, bringing programs to the police department, integrating community members into the police department. So that was something that I really cherished. I was actually one of our first school resource officers that we had in the modern era of what we did at the Pasadena Police Department. And it was our youth advisor program. And so to shape some young people, bring them into the police department, shape them, and then have them to go on and get great jobs. Some of my youth advisors are doctors, they're business owners,
so they didn't
and they're attorneys.
They didn't go into law enforcement?
They never really wanted to go into law enforcement.
What did they use that for then?
Actually what they did, we paired up youth that were at risk with teenagers who were once at risk. Yeah. And so they were mentors for the younger folks. And so those older teenagers actually said to themselves, hey, listen, I don't want to be a police officer, but I want to do something else. And so to put that youth advisor working at the police department on their resume was something that worked well for them.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes as far as decision making and then kids and their influences. But specifically about policing, what you just described, I think, is rather unique as far as the set of skills and characteristics. It's pretty complex if there's the whole law enforcement part, but then there's also community relations. So what sorts of qualities are really, really integral to being a police officer?
I think a great police officer is someone who understands that they're part of the community. You know, when we went to the police academy, and I'm sure they're still being taught today, but there was the father of law enforcement, his name is Sir Robert Peel. And basically he said, Mr. Peel said that the police are the community and community are the police. And that was what was ingrained in us as we were going through the police training. And so I think we have moved a little bit away from that, and I think we need to get back. But if we can get police officers to be connected to the community, to feel as though the community is part of them and they are part of the community, I think we do a better job.
So what are some of the causes or some of the influences that have moved policing away from that? And Peel he was British?
He was a British, I would call him a scholar.
Yeah.
He was a thinker back in the day and really examined law enforcement, said that's the way it really should be done. But I think that some of the things that have moved away from that is that you were hiring police officers from the community at large back when I applied.
Yeah.
At one point, there was 42 people that graduated from John Muir High School that were working at the Pasadena Police Department. There were about 30 from Pasadena High School, some 18 or 20 from Blair, and some from Marshall. So we had a huge population of people that came from the community that were actually police officers. And to me, that was a success for us.
And just to give people sort of a framework, those who are watching at home, out of how many officers do you have total? Like if 42 were from, you're out of how many?
Right, we have up 230, 235.
Sworn officers.
Sworn police officers. And so when I say that, some were dispatchers, some were park safety specialists, but that many people who went to those schools. So when you really look at it, you've got the community working at the police department.
Yeah. So there are some challenges, though, aren't there, if you live in the community where you work, as far as being a police officer, and what would complicate your life?
Well, a lot of the older thinking was you don't want to work in the community in which you grew up. You know, I think the thought was when I go to the market, I'm going to run into the people that I might have arrested. And I'll tell you, being a young person that was born in 1962 here in Pasadena, I didn't really find it a problem. I think that most people will respect you if you give them respect. And so it was okay for being raised in this town and working in this town.
And that respect, I think, also goes to people who then are incarcerated and when they come out. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But it's kind of a luxury, don't you think, though, to hire from Simi Valley or from Palmdale and get officers who drive, or from Huntington Beach. If we were an island or we were a small town, say Spokane, out in the middle of the plains of Washington, you couldn't import officers from other places, right? What do small towns do?
I think small towns have a challenge, but I will tell you that a lot of small towns do hire from their own community.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, and I think that those small towns really get a great bang for their buck. I've been in small towns across this nation where you're driving down the street and you see a police car sitting in the driveway. Right. And, it's kind of refreshing to, see that police car sitting there and this person must be a police officer in this town and takes his car home.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would think there'd be a lot of respect as well.
Right.
There are some challenges, I think, with law enforcement as far as respect these days. And so seeing a lot of the challenges over the last year, or the issues that have surfaced over the last year. From your perspective, how can those be addressed so that there is a little bit tighter bond, not only hiring from the community, but what are some other strategies? I think
we have to have more communication. We've got to learn how to talk more. And I think there are some really great programs that are out there. I mean, coffee with a police officer is a good
curbside coffee and chat.
That's right. Here in Pasadena, it's curbside coffee and chat. In other communities, it's coffee with a police officer. Yeah. But I think we have to find a way to get police officers out of their car, integrating with the community on a regular basis, and break down a barrier, because there's so much that goes on in the media. There's so much negative information about law enforcement. There's so much negative information about our communities. For us to really talk, then we can break it down. But if we're not talking, we don't get a chance to really break that down.
Yeah, so why did policing evolve more to be in the cars? And then, I think the other challenge too is the rotation of the beat. Right. So like you're assigned to one, but then right as you start to make those relationships or form trust, then you're sent to another beat or another part of the department. So
Right.
why were those changes
Well,
made?
we went to rapid mobilization some years back. You know, we wanted, if you called the police department, you wanted that person to be there in a certain amount of time. You didn't want to wait. And so in days gone by, police officers would get out and walk the beat. And so they got a chance to walk your neighborhood, walk your sidewalk, and talk to you. Well, if they got a call, they had to go back to the car, get in the car, and drive to the call. And so we wanted to expedite our responses. And so we said, okay, get in the car and drive. And I think when we did that, we moved away from actually having enough officers to be out to have that interaction from footbeat or just spending time at the neighborhood centers. So we kind of gave up the ability to talk with people for rapid responding to calls.
Yeah.
And so we've got to find a balance somewhere.
Yeah. What do you think it would take to kind of change that paradigm?
I think that we've tried to do some things in law enforcement. We tried to look at online reporting. So if you had a crime that wasn't necessarily in need of a police officer coming out there, you can go online, use a computer, and report the crime. That works. Or just hire a few more officers. If you could hire more officers that would allow others to free themselves up to be in those community centers or actually take those walks on footbeats in the neighborhood, I think we can have a really positive effect in what goes on. Now, the cost of a police officer is not cheap, but you have to figure out what you want to pay for and what you want as a result.
Yeah, and there's kind of this push and pull too in the
Correct.
community of, should we pay for another officer, or maybe we should have more youth programs, or pay for more park programs, or pay for maybe expansion of the football team or something like that. So how would you explain, for example, to decision makers, city council, someone like that, that the value of adding another police officer, even though the cost is really high, outweighs that of maybe having another football coach?
I've always told community members that they tell us what to do. And so community input is crucial. So at community meetings, at city council, if those community members can come and say, we would like to have these type of programs, these officers in our community, we want to see more footbeat, then pretty much the city fathers tend to listen. But we've got to have that kind of conversation. It's not something that the police department would set on its own to say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to do it. A great police department, such as the one we have here in Pasadena, listens to its community. And if the community says, we would like to have more officers on footbeat, and we're willing to pay for those, then that's what we get.
Yeah, I think part of that is having open forums that create that kind of dialogue, but those are sometimes difficult to organize or to do on a regular basis. But I totally agree with you that public opinion does drive decision making,
Yes.
and especially at a local level. You see that all the time at City Hall. But thinking about it a little bit differently, just as an example of when you were growing up, you probably know some of your friends or your neighbors who went a different path from you. Especially thinking about the 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of gang-related activity and then violence. So what would be the best strategy to either keep those people on the right path, or once they get off on the wrong foot, how would you bring them back?
Well, so keeping them on the right foot, when I started at the police department in the 80s, there were a number of programs that were in Pasadena that helped employ a number of young men and women. So I think one of the keys is employment, because if a person is employed, then they become a viable product of the community. So employment is a key. Education's another key. Great education, great schools, having young men and women feel as though they're a part of the community is the second part. And then lastly, I think that if we could find young people who say they want to be part of the civic process, they want to be part of the police department, the city council, the fire department, they want to volunteer, then you got a community that really tends to thrive and flourish. And so if we can find a way to integrate those three things into our young people, then I think that our community grows.
Yeah. Just as an aside, a couple of years ago, the YMCA conducted a survey. There's a place called the Search Institute. It's in Minnesota, and it's asset development and asset mapping. So it asked kids, 8th graders, it asked all the 8th graders in the Pasadena Unified School District if there's 40 questions, but one of the questions was, do you feel as though your community cares for you, that your community recognizes you, that your community sees you? Do you know what the percentage was of kids who answered yes was? No. 24%.
Wow.
So 76%, and this is about 2.5 years ago, are feeling as though the community doesn't care about me. So I think that's the genesis of what you were talking about, kids not feeling cared for, feeling as though they're important.
Right. We had great programs. I remember attending Field Elementary School, and we had field days out there, and the coach, his name was Mr. Thomas. And I remembered, and I used to see Mr. Thomas as I was a police officer, and that's 4th, 5th, and 6th grade when I went to Field Elementary School. I used to see him around town. My Pop Warner football coach, same thing. I would see him around town.
Yeah.
So when you have people that made you feel as part of the community, and you could see them there, I think that goes a long way, as I said, toward making a great community.
Yeah, and the way you're describing it too is potentially a police officer could serve that role as well too. Let's talk about a little bit different subject. Once a person is adjudicated and then sent to jail or prison, they leave the community, and they leave. I think the wraparound sort of community services, but then also the atmosphere of friends and family. We don't have a whole lot of control of what goes on in prison or in jail, but we do have control over what happens when folks get out. So why is, and it's termed reentry or reintegration depending on who you're talking to, why is that so important to you, and do you have a story of how maybe you became really interested in helping people once they came out?
Yeah, it's kind of near and dear to me. I mean, I've spoken about this topic at several venues, whether they be at panel discussions or at conventions, things like that. And I tend to talk about what I had seen over my 34 years as a police officer growing up in this town. When you've gone to school with men and women who were, in some cases, your good friends,
right?
And then seeing them either become the victim of gang violence, become the victim of the narcotics industry, whether they either went to jail or may have lost their life to that. And my thought is that in some of those cases, those people made mistakes, and they made circumstantial mistakes because, one, maybe there wasn't a job, they didn't have some of the wraparounds that we had just talked about, and they found themselves selling drugs. They found themselves violating the law and have gone to prison. I knew them as great kids, great friends of mine.
So when they're like 8, 9, 10.
Correct. And then they go away at 21, 22, and for some 20 and 30 years. And our system is designed that you're supposed to learn when you go to jail and get incarcerated.
It's called rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation. And so I think if that is in fact true, then when people come home, we should be able to help them if they need those reentry or reintegration services. And so for me, I believed that I could do a lot of good by trying to help my friends who found themselves incarcerated, whether it be something that they did or were with a friend, but come home and then get back on the right track.
Yeah, and there are many contributing factors for those decisions, and whether it's the neighborhood they grew up in, or some of their friends or family. It's complex. But the point is that I think what you're saying is help them to recapture who they originally were.
Correct.
Or their true potential.
Right. Help them get back on track, because I think that all of us have tracks inside of us. We know what we should be doing. However, when you find yourself off track and then you come home and the services are there to help you get back on track and be a productive citizen, then that's good for you. It's also good for law enforcement, because if in fact we can take people and get them back on track and be productive citizens, it's safer for the law enforcement officer.
But then why are there some people in law enforcement who don't believe in reintegration programs?
Because I think that when a tragedy occurs, someone kills a police officer or some horrendous crime happens, we tend to point to the one thing that's horrendous and say, see, the programs aren't working. But we really don't delve into the other numbers that show how many people the programs have helped. Yeah. And those numbers are great. I don't even think I'm anybody, I always say that to myself, but I'm in Los Angeles when I was walking looking for jobs in a recycling center in Los Angeles, not in Pasadena, in Los Angeles. Yeah. And a young lady sees me and she says, "Oh, Mr. Qualls, how are you?" And I go, "Hi, how are you?" She comes over to give me a hug and she goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, "No." She says, "I came to your reintegration program and I got this job." And she's down in Los Angeles, but she remembered me from coming to the program.
So this is a personal, I would say, passion for you.
Correct.
But it's not necessarily for the department. So kind of a two-part question is, what is the responsibility of police departments in this process? And I totally agree with you. I think it makes our community safer.
Yes.
And it makes the officers safer. So what is the responsibility of the police department? And if there is hesitancy in police departments, how can they be convinced that helping people when they come out is of value?
Right. I think that the hesitancy is, a lot of police officers have said very clearly to me, our job is to put people in jail. It's not to actually help them when they get out. And I said,
But isn't your job to make the community safe?
That's correct.
Not to put people in jail?
Right. So I have to.
That's different, right?
Yeah, I have to explain the entire cycle to them, and a lot of them understand it and they get it. And I think here in Pasadena, with the Pasadena Latino Reintegration Council, the police department has bought in. We've got people who come every month to the PAC fairs and participate. And it's great to see a police officer come to that event and stand up and say, "Hey, we want to help you."
Right.
I would hope that some of my other colleagues across the nation, other police departments would say this is something that they should be involved in. But I think it's successful.
Yeah, and that goes to the second part of the question. I don't think necessarily by just looking at it or seeing a video or something that it would change them. But I think part of the shift is actually having other law enforcement come and say, this is what we've done, it's been tested, this has made our community safer and our officers safer. Is that a strategy? I mean, it seems like law enforcement doesn't listen to the public that much, but they will listen to other officers.
Yeah, I think they tend to listen to other officers who actually have some sincerity about them, who actually can say, look, this program works, and I can give you the evidence of it working. There's a couple police departments that came to look at what we do here in Pasadena, and they've replicated it out east in San Bernardino County.
Oh, right.
I recently got a call from Seattle, Washington, from a clergy group that asked me about our reintegration program. So people are hearing. I think there are those voices that are saying these types of programs can make a difference. But as I said to you earlier, I said sometimes one bad thing happens, causes these kind of programs to take a back seat. And we have to really look at all the positives.
And I think that's human nature, that if there is a tragedy or an emergency or a huge challenge, we tend to become more conservative.
Right.
And not understanding that sometimes that conservatism actually makes it more difficult for us to protect ourselves.
Correct.
So thinking about your career in law enforcement, what would you say, what are you most proud of? What's your...
Again, working in community relations, and then, the reintegration program. I did get a chance to work counterterrorism, which was just an unbelievable experience, to be one of a couple people that were trying to make sure that the citizens of Pasadena were safe. They allowed me to travel to Israel. I spent 3 weeks in Israel studying terrorism and seeing how they were making their homeland safe, and to bring some of that information back and institute it here was great. So my time in community relations, my time in counterterrorism, and then pretty much the other one was probably patrol, because I knew so many people out on the streets that I just loved it.
Yeah. So a lot of people in the community that have questions about law enforcement. What would you say to them right now to help them to understand that this shouldn't be, or really for society to function, it can't be us against them?
Right. I don't think it should be us against them. I think that dialogue, the conversation of having somebody that you know in law enforcement in your town that you can talk to is one way to break down that barrier. And having more dialogues like this, where people can come and ask a question, where you can have an exchange of ideas, really changes how citizens look at their police department. I think you may know that for a period of time I was a police commissioner in the city of Claremont.
Oh, right, oversight.
And, yes, and there I actually had some oversight, along with the police chief in Claremont at the time, of their police department. And you know, we would invite citizens to come in and ask us questions once a month during our meetings, so that if there was a question about how policing was being done in that city, we would answer those questions. But I encourage questioning.
Yeah, and open
Nothing wrong with
dialogue.
that, and open dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's a very progressive sort of an attitude. I think some people in the community feel like law enforcement is somewhat insular. But those are great suggestions, and I hope that people watching the show will understand a little bit better maybe how to develop a relationship with the police department so that it is a community endeavor, because otherwise it's not going to work.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being here today. And any last thoughts? If you were 15 watching the show, what would you want to? What could you convey to that 15-year-old to say?
If I had a chance to talk to a 15-year-old, I would tell them that law enforcement is a great career. Whether you become a Pasadena police officer, whether you become a South Pasadena police officer, whether you become an FBI agent or a CIA agent, those opportunities are there for you to serve. And I think that they will see how rewarding it is if, in fact, they give themselves the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think that's that key point, is to serve the community.
serve.
And your particular Sir Beale, or whoever he was, Peel. I think he said it right. I think that was exactly what we should be doing. So thank you very much for being here, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So.